Hey guys, welcome to the video. I'm Dex, your data engineering instructor and top snipe in the engine room. We're building an ETL data pipeline to load data from a flat file into an as yet unspecified analytics database. In the previous video, we used the business rules we got from our stakeholder to add a calculation to our data transform, allowing us to emit records containing the number of days each customer has been a customer. So looking at this here, where is it? Here we go. So that's what we've added. We're calling that value longevity in the data source, or days as subscriber in the output record. And according to the business rules that we gathered, the way we calculate a user's longevity is the same no matter what the user's status is. But now imagine that word has come down from the CSO that we do need to know when someone suspended their account, because the number of days the account has been on hold must be subtracted from the longevity. Now, there could be many reasons for that. It could be that the cost structure of maintaining an active versus a dormant user is different and accounting wants to know. It could be that since a suspended user doesn't see our ad content, that matters to the advertising and marketing people. Whatever the reason is, we have been thrown a curveball, and this is very common in data engineering. We need to update our calculation, and we require a data point that we have to get from somewhere. It's not anywhere in the source data. So let's say there's a service that provides that data. Now, normally we could just connect to it from, let's see, from the data source, right? We could connect to it from here, from inside this lookup logic. But that's a poor choice, because if we did that, there'd be no easy way to initialize that object from here. We couldn't reuse that functionality anywhere else. And whenever the connection parameters changed, we'd have to alter the source code. So what we need to do now is create a plugin, a service object. And when I wrote xfile, I designed in the ability to easily plug in something that wraps an external service or data store. That ability was already there in other tools I'd written, so I made sure it was part of xfile. So we'll demo that now, all right? So in the config file, in our YAML config file, and again, we've been over this in other videos, I've registered a service object, just one. This section was empty in previous videos. Now it's populated. So let's walk through it. There's one service object. It is called events. That is its alias. The class is actually, the Python class is business event DB. It has these initialization parameters, okay? And when we start up xfile, when we run xfile, what happens is for every service object that's been registered in here, the constructor will be called. Xfile will pass in these name value pairs to the constructor, and all these service objects will be spun up and initialized, okay? And then a wrapped dictionary containing all these instances, all these singletons, will be passed to the constructor of our lookup data source class. And this is before xfile starts to do any work on the actual transform that we've told it to do, start to actually run on the map. Before that happens, all this happens. So before we do anything else, let's just try to run our transform. Remember from the last video, we added a make target, so we can just do make extract. Okay, very good. Module test services has no attribute business event DB. So business event DB, where do we get test services? Well, test services is our designated service module for this project. It's a Python module where the service objects all live. So test services, let's look at that. There's no class called business event DB in here. So let's write that. Okay. So those keyword arguments represent the name value pairs that I'm passed based on what I specified in the init file, okay? So okay. So we're there. Of course, I'm guaranteed to be past these name value pairs, so I don't have to check that this dictionary subscript is valid. Okay. And if I wanted to bulletproof this, if I was worried about people introducing errors into the config file, I have a mechanism for that, but I'll skip over that for now. Okay. Now let's do the following. Okay, so now, actually, I'm going to say this. I'm going to say self data equals none. Okay, and then I'm going to say self data equals YAML dot safe load f. Okay, and then I'm going to say, okay, actually, let's just do this. Let's just do print common.json pretty self data. Okay. Okay, so all we want to do right now is just make sure that we're reading the data file. We've specified subscriber.db. This is just a YAML file with some business event data. Remember that the updated business rules have told us that we need to, touch this database and get the suspension events that are logged for each user. So this is what we have, just some dummy data. Okay. So now let's see services. There we are. Okay. So that's all we want to do. We want to verify that that's doing what it should do. So let's run our transform. And there we go. Okay, suspension events. This is what we want. We want a dictionary of, an array of dictionaries. Okay, so we've got that. Now let's jump back in and keep going. We know that we want to. Actually, I know what I want to do. And now, let's see. So we want to say, so we loaded that, right? Now let's do this. Let's say self db equals that. Okay. And then I'm going to say for s in self data and let's assume for now suspension events. Oh, that's the typo. Let's assume that there always be a suspension events field in that. So we're going to say self db. I'm going to say s user because that's what it is, right? So if user equals, right? We're going to say suspension event user equals s user. excuse me, s date. All right. Okay, so it looks right to me. Okay. Smoke test. Okay. Now, we need to also provide a method, def. Let's call this get suspension event. Let's assume that someone is only allowed to suspend their account once during the period of their subscription. So we're just keeping it simple, right? So self username, okay? And all we're going to say is return self.db get username, okay? Right, so that should be fine. And let's see, I think that's right. If we were to say, I'm going to comment this out for a moment, and just to verify, print common JSON pretty self.db. Okay, let's do that. Okay, all right, so that works. We've turned the raw YAML file that we were reading into a dictionary where the keys are usernames in the form of email addresses, because we know those are unique. That's what we want, okay? That's fine. Now, what do we want to do next? We want to, I'm using the raw date here, right? Which I don't want to do. I want to actually use a real date. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to def parse date, excuse me. All right. Okay. Now, actually, I'm going to do some copy pasta. Don't do this at home, but there we go. So that's token for token in date string split, right? Right. So there we are. Okay. So that's all we want to do, and then we can say I'm gonna poorly reuse code from my lookup. I just want to use these constants. Now, again, I'm repeating myself all over the place here. What you'd really want to do is have a constants.py and put all your constants in that, so you're only referring to them in one place. This is not something you should do in a production system ever. We're just very quickly moving along here, right? So we have, we're basically parsing that raw date string from the subscriber database, right, which is the same as it is in our source data, month, day, year, okay? And we're just taking that, and now we're going to say return date, time, date, and we're going to say tokens, and since, again, the date constructor takes year, month, and okay, and that's it. All right. So, okay, so that looks all right to me, right? So then we can just say date equals parse date, and we can pass in that date string, okay? Okay. All right. So now we should just say print self db, right? I'm not going to do common JSON pretty just in case it chokes on the on printing out the date. Make extract. Okay, there we go, right? Beautiful. Okay, that's what we want. All right. So now we're good to go. We know we can read our source data file and you know, get the information we want. Now let's see what don't I like about this. Oh, I think I'm going to call this find suspension event, not get suspension event. Why? Because I'm a little bit, it's a quirk of mine. I'm kind of neurotic about names. Get suspension event implies that there is a defined attribute in this thing that we're going to retrieve, right? But the fact is, this can be null. So at least with find suspension event, I am implying that one might not find it, which is fine, right? It's not an exceptional condition. You're going to find it if it's there. If it's not, you'll get back a null. But it's just any hint I can drop for my potential users, I want to drop in the code to make it easy. So find instead of get. All right. What else? I think that's good. Okay. So now let's turn our attention to the data source, right? So in the lookup data source, right? Let's get rid of spurious prints for now. And so we're going to say, equals canonical longevity. So we know there's, you know, now we have some additional stuff to do. We know that we're going to return longevity, but between the time we look up the longevity and we return it, there's some work to do, because according to our business rules, okay, we have to we gotta actually get that suspension event that's been logged for user. So now we're inside the actual lookup data source code, and just briefly remember that that's what happens when xfile tries to transform a record and it looks to generate this particular output field. It's going to call this method on our lookup data source, and the return value of that method will be passed out will be emitted as the value of this field. Okay, so now we're here. Okay, we've got this service. It's the business event database. Now we need to get a pointer to that object, essentially to that singleton in here. How do we do that? Well, here we have a service object registry. This is a wrapped database, okay, of all the service objects which we registered in the init file. Now the init file, all we have is the one, okay, and it's called events, okay. So the first thing we do is we're going to retrieve that service object, which is already initialized and spun up and has all its data. We're going to retrieve that from the registry. So we're going to say biz, this is called an event DB, okay, equals, let's not be too terse, event DB equals self services, and we just say lookup. Now, let's say we say lookup event. There we go. right? We have a polite error message that says no service object registered under the alias event, right? That's way better than just getting a key error, which is why I'm passing a wrapped dictionary, not just a Python dictionary. So we say events, and now, we run it and there's no problem. Okay. So now, so what are we going to do? Well, very simply, we can just say if event db find, what did we call it again? We called it find suspension event. Okay. Suspension event, right? And then, recalc, right? That is, we're going to subtract. We're going to figure out how long they've been suspended, and subtract it from the original longevity calculation. Okay. Or we could also say, remember that there's a status field. Right? We have a subscription status field. So we could simply assume that the user is suspended, and therefore there will be a suspension event. I suspect that'll end up, you can imagine that if this were a production system, we'd have to look at that as another possible area that we need to bulletproof, right? If someone has a suspended status, but there is no suspension event in the events database for them, maybe we need to throw an exception, but we need to filter out records like that altogether. And we need to actually, do that lookup in the previous stage where we're filtering bad records. But for now, it's fine. Let's just say that we're going to say find suspension event, and if we find one, let's look at this this database as the source of truth. So if we find that suspension event, we're going to recalculate. Now, how we're going to get what are we passing to this? We're passing the username, which is in the form of an email address. Now, in the actual, let's look at the data first, right? So we have a first name and last name, but let's say their unique username is going to be their email address. Okay. And in our transform, right, so we can do a bunch of things. We can just look it up in the source record, and we can call it email address. Okay. Or we can, right. So we could say, username equals source record, and we could say email address, right? That should work because there is an email address field in the source record, so we can just read that raw and it'll give us that, and that's perfectly fine. And then we can say, looks like there's construction going on next door. So find suspension event username. Okay. Then we will say print. I'm going to say suspension event found for user on date. Okay. And then we're going to say, actually what we should really do is say suspension event equals if suspension event, and remember we're assuming that there's only one, there can only ever be one per user. Okay, so we say if suspension event, then right? So now we say suspension event dot user, There we go. Suspension event dot date. Okay. That's all right. So actually, I don't know about line splitting this tuple. I've never tried doing that. I wouldn't be surprised if that failed. Okay, let's see. Nope, works fine. Okay, so suspension event found for user Jane Doe at hello.net on date 2020-02-13, and this 20-02-25. And if we look back, and there's only 2 of them, that makes sense, right? If we look at our source data, right, we see that Jane Doe was indeed, she suspended her account. And who else? Old Timer also at CompuServe also suspended his account. And then if we go and look at the subscriber DB, that's right. February 13th for her and February 25th for him, right? The 13th for her, 25th for him. So that makes sense. Okay. So now we're just about good to go. And I'm coming up on the half-hour mark. I think this is a good stopping point. I can leave the rest of this as an exercise for the reader, because what is this now? We have an actual date here. This is an actual date object we're getting back from the suspension event, okay? We already know the longevity because we calculated that last time around, okay? And what we have to do here is simply some date arithmetic along the lines of what we did here. We're just calculating the differences between dates, right? We have the longevity, and now that we know the suspension date, okay, and their status is suspended, we're simply calculating the date, the time delta, between this date and today, and subtracting that from the longevity calculation, which we already have. So that's a good exercise for the reader, for the watcher, if you wanna pull the code and mess around, try that out. But the important thing, the thrust of this particular video was to show, to demonstrate the ability to plug in external services to this. That's the thing I really wanted to show, right? Is that whatever you're doing, if you've got to reach out, somewhere else, you've got to, do a database lookup, you've got to, pull something from a service, whatever it is, that it's very easy to do that in the context of xfile, and you just open up your services module, and all your logic is in there. So that's where I'll stop for this video. Now we're really ready. No more curveballs. Now we're really ready to take this transform that we have and plug it into the next stage. And we're gonna write the load phase of our ETL pipeline next. We're going to use the ingest tool to do that. And then our real database is also going to make an appearance. We'll reach out and touch my data center, and we'll talk about all that stuff. So that's it for now. Thank you for watching. All the relevant links will be in the description as always. And feel free to like and subscribe if you thought this was helpful. I'll see you next time in the engine room. Take care.